Welcome to Taking Care of Business on News Talk 1180 KERN for the best in Saturday Talk Radio at 1 o'clock and on 1230 KGEO at 10 o'clock Saturday. And for the best in Wednesday Talk Radio on 1410 KERI, the Christian station. We're now on 1000 KKIM in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and also 3 times on the internet on knookmedia.com, serving Richmond, Oakland, and the San Francisco Bay Area. Your host is Clay Koerner, and I'm Marty Pay, and our producer, as always, is the great Greg Held. Hey, we had a great interview last week, Clay, with Assemblyman Tim Donnelly, who's now a gubernatorial candidate for the Republican nomination for governor in California. I liked him a lot.
You know, I finally listened to the show, and it was pretty good, Marty.
Good? You liked it?
You did a good job.
Now, well, thank you. Thank you. Does that mean I get to keep my job another couple of weeks?
Yeah, you can keep it.
Okay.
I have found no need for me.
Oh. Well, listen, I hope you realize I didn't stick your neck out as far as endorsing Tim.
No, I saw that you endorsed him.
I liked him a lot, and as far as I'm concerned, he's my candidate.
I think I'm endorsing Rudy Salas for governor.
Yeah. We're going to have his opponent next week, potentially his opponent.
Oh, good.
Yeah. We also had a great time with David Stockman, President Reagan's budget director. His book, The Great Deformation, I really, really enjoyed. I think he's right on the money. We might want to talk a little bit about that with our first guest today. We're definitely going to have him back, though. Today we've got a great show. In the second half, we have an old friend of mine, a farmer whose picture is plastered all up and down Highway 99, Steve Paul, to talk about water and agriculture. But on the phone right now, we've got former California Republican Party chairman and author Tom Del Beccaro. Tom, welcome back to Taking Care of Business. Tom, are you there?
I'm here. How are you today?
Good, good. It was a pleasure having you on. So you're suffering from this same lousy cold that I've had the last 3 weeks. It's
3
ugly.
weeks? Has it been that long for you? Please don't say it that way.
It's well, mine started out with vertigo, oddly enough. I was very dizzy. I couldn't drive, and they said you've got a inner ear infection caused by a head cold. I said, I don't have a head cold, and then the next day, wow, there it was. So it's crazy. So I hope you don't have it for 3 weeks. But, hey, I want to start out talking with you a little bit about this great article that you have that I guess is coming out in Forbes today, talking about the rule of law.
Absolutely, yes. You know, there's a really important case winding its way through the California court system with regard to HighSpeed Rail. Now, HighSpeed Rail is the dream child of Jerry Brown. I call it in the article his edifice complex project. Basically, Jerry Brown wants to build something like his father did and claim it for his own. But the problem is there isn't sufficient funding for it. And the bond measure required the identification of all the funds for the project before the project could go forward, and they would sell bonds, California bonds, to build a portion of it. And, you know, the language of the measure and was pretty clear. But we have runaway bureaucracies and those who don't like to follow the rule of law in this country. I mean, obviously we have Obama, who this week, he signed another executive order to expand overtime pay. He's changed unilaterally Obamacare at least 15 times. We also have runaway bureaucracies. They essentially are part of the executive branch, and their task is to carry out legislation. But there's a point where it changes from carrying out legislation and creating it. So, for instance, Obamacare is, what was it, a 2,500-page bill?
Yeah, initially. Mm-hmm.
But the regulations are over 20,000 pages, and of course, they're every bit as much law as the original 2,500 pages.
And they change every
week.
So
when does it morph from carrying out the law to creating the law? And when it comes to high-speed rail, the Democrats want this so badly, even though there isn't secure funding for the entire project, that what they tried to do was build a small portion of it by identifying the funds for the small portion, and basically ignore the fact that they don't know where the funds are going to come for the rest of the project. And Kings County and some individuals sued, and they basically said, no, that initiative, that bond initiative, was a contract with California. And you have to follow certain guidelines. And in order to sell bonds, you have to, A, have reasonably identified all the funding, and B, go through certain environmental hoops.
Which, none of which they've done.
Yeah, which they can't, and quite frankly, they cannot do.
No, because there's no. I mean, the places the funding was supposed to come from, it hasn't come from. Tom, hold on one second here, okay? We're having a conversation with Tom Beccaro, the former California Republican head, author, talking a little bit about the rule of law, HighSpeed Rail, and some other things we're going to get into. So, Tom, let's back up one second here, okay? Define rule of law for people.
Well, the concept of the rule of law is really centuries old, and it is in contrast by the rule of men. Most of history is not a form of democracy. Most of history, of course, is something like a dictator or a monarch, benevolent or not. And that was the rule of man. So if the king wanted one thing one day and a different thing the next day, however irreconcilable the positions were, it didn't matter, because it was one man, one rule. Over time, theories of law started to develop, and the rule of law is essentially that we should have written rules, and we should abide by the rules, and no one man should be above the law. In fact, you should be not only subject to the law, but you should be governed by the law. Now, when it comes to modern day in America, we obviously had a constitution whose job was to really fence in what government can do and also subject men to rules. But currently, really across the country, we have these disputes between executives, bureaucracies, House of Representatives, Senates, assemblies, about who has what right to do what, because so much of government right now is so active. They all want to do things and spend people's money. And they're fighting over who has jurisdiction over what.
Basically, though, Tom, doesn't the rule of law say that the politicians should be governed by the same law that they implement for the rest of us?
Well, that's part of it. That's one half of it, that they should be subject to the law. But it's also that the law sets down the rules for however you implement what you're doing. So it's one thing for the California Attorney General and Jerry Brown to be subject to the law. They're not above it. But when the voters pass an initiative, they have to follow that. They don't get to ignore it. And what's happening with HighSpeed Rail right now is that they can't comply with it because they'll never be able to say, this is where the funding's coming from. And that's the central issue. Where is all the funding coming from? You cannot sell bonds unless you can reasonably assure us and identify the source of those funds.
Yeah, but why isn't anybody taking them to court? You know, we've got the same thing on a federal level when you think about Obamacare. I mean, this guy's changed it 34 different times, and like you say, the 2,000 or 2,500 page law is now a 20,000 page encyclopedia, and the Republicans aren't challenging him. Why isn't it going on in Washington or in Sacramento? Why?
Well, there is an existing case in Sacramento where Kings County and two individuals sued and said you haven't complied with the bond measure, therefore you can't sell the bonds. And a judge in Sacramento Superior Court, has said, you know what? I read the bond measure, which is now law. It has pretty obvious and clear guidelines. You haven't met them, therefore you can't sell the bonds. The reaction from Jerry Brown and the Attorney General is, we need to get this judge out of the way. And so they have, instead of trying to comply with the law, which they can't do, instead they're appealing the rulings, hoping that courts above the Superior Court judge will do what? Say that he's wrong and that he has no right to stand for the rule of law, that they're close enough, they can start part of it, substantial compliance, these kind of notions. And that's really what's going on right now. And so the Attorney General, Kamala Harris, who wants to be the governor of California, has appealed the Superior Court ruling, saying two things. She has said: one, you're wrong, and two, you don't even have a right to give a ruling at all. So she wants him out of the way so that the High-Speed Rail Commission can do whatever it wants. And if he's not out of the way, she wants his ruling overturned.
Lovely. When we come back from the break, let's pick it up right there, Tom, okay?
Sure.
We'll be back in a moment on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio News Talk 1180.